of January, the Federation of Jewish Communities in Russia holds in the Jewish Museum and Center of Tolerance an official ceremony to the Remembrance Day of the Holocaust victims. The central event organized by the Russian Jewish Congress, a week of memory, there will be held a commemorative evening in the Stanislavski Nemirovich Danchenko Theater. There were performances of singers and actors in the Museum of History of Gulag. We will a memorial concert we will remember will be held in the House of the Peoples of Russia. The 27th of January is also celebrated yet another event, and this will be an anniversary, the 80th anniversary of the full liberation of Leningrad by the Soviet army from the Nazi blockade. This date and those 872 miserable sufferings will live and will remain in our heart and in our country of the humankind. It is our deed today as ancestors to preserve historic truth about the siege of Leningrad and this pain of the victims who buried in Piskarev, Smolensk, and other burial sites and mass graves. St. Petersburg will hold mass commemorative ceremonies. There will be wreath layings and Piskarov Memorial Cemetery and other memorial complexes and burial sites of the defendants and citizens of the siege Leningrad, torch lighting procedures at rostral columns of the city, ceremonies and concerts. These celebrations will end up with fireworks. The events to commemorate the deed of the citizens of the blockade Leningrad also provides for the unveiling of memorial site dedicated to the civilians of the Soviet Union who died in 1941-1944 in the branch of the St. Petersburg State Cultural Center and Memorial Complex Defenders of Leningrad. And as for the diplomatic calendar, the 1st of February, we commemorate our relations between the establishment of diplomatic relations with Peru. At this very day, our diplomatic relations, which went through the 160th anniversary, this is a good opportunity to remind on the good traditions of friendship and mutually beneficial partnership, which were passed the test of time. We remember that the first ambassador in Moscow, there was a brilliant Peruvian diplomat, Javier Pérez de Cuellar, who was then re-elected at the position of the UN Secretary General. I would like to mention that our bilateral relations were not selfish. They are really friendly. We are ready to further strengthen our political dialogue and multifaceted cooperation with Peru for the benefit of the peoples of our nation in order to just a more democratic and just multipolar world based on the principles of equal rights and sovereignty of states. I would like to wish our Peruvian colleagues success at this shift, the presidency in the APEC, the leading Asia-Pacific Forum, where Russia and Peru are working together to increase economic growth and ensure prosperity of the region. And the 2nd of February, of course, the year 1943. This date was the date of defeat by the Red Army of the Nazi troops in Stalingrad. This battle and city defenders defended the bridgehead and approaches to Volga, and then to start offensive, which ended up on the 2nd of February 1943 by encircling and defeating the Hitler Army, Field Marshal Friedrich Paphos. This victory has spotlighted courage and spirit and readiness to sacrifice in the name of all Soviet people who thwarted these misanthropic plans of neo-Nazis by preventing global disaster. This defeat of the Nazi had become a watershed in the Great Patriotic War and influenced a lot the USSR foreign policy and diplomacy, ensured a lot strengthening our international authority. In the pro-Nazi countries, they were very confused by these events. Pro-fascist regime were in crisis in Italy, Romania, Hungary, Slovakia. A significant weakening of Germany's influence and its satellites, stripping off all their differences. Japan abandoned all its forceful plans in the far east of Soviet Union. The Turkish politicians sought to keep neutrality, and Germany showed restraint and alienation. Our Red Army thwarted any plans of Hitler to capture Caucasus and take Middle East, disrupted encirclement of Leningrad, and ensured success in the Kursk battle in summer 1943, bringing closer the opportunity of opening of the Second Front in summer 1944. Our motherland commends all those who struggled in the Stalingrad battle. 112 outstanding soldiers became heroes of the Soviet Union. On the 1st of May 1945, by the order of the Supreme Chief Commander, Stalingrad was proclaimed a hero city. On the 8th of May 1965, it was awarded with the Order of Lenin and the Gold Star Medal. In accordance with the Federal Law 32, dated March 13, 1995, the 2nd of February, in memory of the defeat of the Red Army of the Nazi troops in the Stalingrad battle, is the day of military glory. Now I am ready to answer your question. Is Journal International Life with us? Yes. Good afternoon, Maria Vladimirovna. In your introduction notes, you touched upon the question on the supplies to Kiev regime by the United States and other countries. Nevertheless, the NATO Secretary General said that NATO invests $1.2 billion to production of artillery munitions to support Ukraine. So how can you make a comment? The matter is that NATO leaders intimidates its population with a looming war, and instead of restoring economy, it calls for weaponize its economy in order to ensure long-term support to Zelensky, and so on and so forth. I believe NATO should define whether they want to fight against us themselves, and if it is so please tell us it directly, and to all the members and to its population and to the whole international community. And what they are doing right now, they're just inventing some stories. And I've already spoke about this today. We are aware why they are doing so. Because the Kiev regime is losing. They have not forged any other strategy because their own economy is at the brink of a destruction, because deviation from the liberal foundations is quite obvious. They started to govern all the spheres, and they need to justify somehow, but indirectly. So they forge some strange stories. But the main issue which the NATO should answer, whether they want this war, which they use to intimidate their population, or is just another propaganda to implement these information and political ideas. Kiev disappointed aspirations of the United States. It emptied the military arsenals of many Western countries. In order to restock them, NATO will require to increase their weapons production. In accordance with the plans by Washington and its satellites, the Kiev regime should be a star in the sky. Everything should have been the West style there. And they should have started to obtain these financial benefits. But it's quite the opposite right now. The Kiev regime failed all it could fail. Strategic defeat was inflicted on the West itself, because the economy of the leading countries is in recession. And what's next? The Secretary General of NATO reported about signing of defense contracts amounting to $10 billion. More than a billion of them come to purchase munitions 155 millimeters in order to restock the NATO supplies. However, such supplies may start only in 2 years. Right now, the United States believes that NATO should find and search for in their stocks in order to ensure unimpeded supply of the Ukrainian army with weapons. They were told that this will be at Blitzkrieg, that they will address this issue very fast. I think the stakes were for several months. And what about the Ukrainian people? Of course, everybody knows. Of course, they will target the civilian people and civilian objects which has nothing to do with the military purpose. The victims of those terrorist attacks will live on conscience of those who cover up this criminal Kiev regime and recklessly supply it with new portions of arms. Washington, and a very important aspect here, why do we hear so many statements in NATO countries themselves, such forceful statements intimidating its own population about some threat coming from Russia? If now Kiev regime holds for some time, then Russia will wage all its aggressive potential against the West. Why do they do so? Because they need to justify and to build their own strategy for the future and to forge the holes. And the main thing, that the true plans and the true goals behind this is to wage conflicts on the territories of many countries. Why? Because they are experiencing bad economic situation. People are very cruel to each other inside the United States, and of course confrontation on the European continent of the countries who already have a decade-long experience of cooperation. This is a cherished dream of the Americans, and that is why they are doing so. They tried to trigger conflicts, and they continue to do so. Thank you very much. Another question. 10 days ago, on the night in Belce, there was an information panel established on the Malinovsky Street. So how can you comment this act of barbarism in Moldavia? Fortunately, that on the 18th of January, with the help of good young activists, this information board was put back on its place, and yet another table was put on the Malinovsky Street. Of course, this deed deserves respect. And so we can cite other countermeasures who are taken in response to such dehumiliating policy. It's not just about the information plate. It's just the historical truth. And it deserves respect.
I don't have to do it, but I will do it all the same. The name of a hero of the Great Patriotic War, Rodion Matrovsky, is inextricably linked with Moldovan land. He met the war in June 1941 as the commander of 48th Infantry Corps of the Odessa military district. He was stationed in the Moldovan city of Balti, and a few months later, the troops of the entire Southern Front were under his control. He took part in the Battle of Stalingrad, and conducted a number of major offensive operations, such as the famous Yazı-Kishinev one, which resulted in the liberation of Moldovan land from the German, Romanian fascist occupation in August 1944. The restoration of a commemorative panel of Malinovsky once again shows that the Moldovans remember our common history and the honor of those heroes who saved this country from Nazi slavery. And I'm talking about these barbarian actions. We were only made possible thanks to the Chisinau authorities who are conducting not just a Russophobic policy, but the policy of erasing memory of your own citizens. And what is the goal? The goal is the same as it was back then, to make people the material which will just follow orders, to strip them of the image of the person who has free will, who thinks, who acts. They will be turned into instruments of their own policies, so that's why they erase history. But I can only hope that it's impossible to erase this memory. But you cannot cancel this memory of the Moldovans, because it's a cultural, historic civilization code. It's what is a part of their national heritage. Because when it's not only their own land and their culture, but they fought for. We were fighting against the universal evil. Okay, let's proceed. Thank you. If you don't have any more questions, is there Novosti here today? Yes, we have one question. It has to do with Sweden's membership in NATO. The Turkish parliament voted to ratify Sweden's membership in NATO. How does Moscow assess the step on the part of Ankara, as well as Sweden's upcoming accession to the NATO? Well, Sweden's membership in NATO will have a big negative impact on the stability in the Baltic region and Northern Europe, and abandoning the long-standing policy of the military non-alignment and joining the ranks of those that are openly hostile to Russia is unlikely to strengthen the sense of security of ordinary Swedes. We will not allow any weakening of our security, as we have already said numerous times, and we will take retaliatory measures of political and military technical nature in order to tame the threats to our country's defense capability. We will determine their specific content depending on what measures will be taken within the framework of Sweden's integration into NATO, including the possible deployment of NATO's strike weapon system and forces in the territory of this country. Yes, if that's it. Is Sputnik here? Yes, Maria Vladimirovna, good afternoon. My question is the Judgement day clock, which reflects the intensity of situation in the world, was showed 90 seconds to nuclear midnight. Do you think this tension will only grow this year? I think this is a metaphor, a symbol. I think it has its right to exist, but we are operating in precise measures, numbers, facts, prognosis. So I will not use these metaphors when answering your questions. I will only say that unfortunately, recently, we have not seen any step which would work in the opposite direction. I have not seen any step which would help this world become more stable, more secure, which would make the world more predictable in the good sense. Not boring, but predictable. So that trust and security will become characteristics of international relations of today. What the tendency of building relations of respect, friendship, and trust between peoples and nations is restored. But we don't see this happening. What we see is the destruction of the existing system, and the main blow is against international law. However, anything adequate, we do not get anything adequate in return. Nobody even thinks of that. The only thesis of a world order based on rules was proposed, and you know what, there are no rules, it's just the rule of strength that exists. But this tendency showed itself as not trustworthy as the world majority showed, but what this world order was proposed for, why it was imposed on us. It's getting back to the times of imperialism and colonialism, the dominance of one against over the rest. So I'd like to say once again, but against all the fronts we are fighting against a world which would be just, which would be based on the international law. We're fighting against neo-colonialism, all kinds of xenophobia, segregation, inadmissibility, which are just signs of the dominance of one nation, one country over the others. This is illegal. We do all we can across the board. Thank you. Thank you. Let's proceed. Is News.ru here? Yes, good afternoon, Maria Vladimirovna. Mikhail Rozan, News.ru. We have 3 questions. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Armenia, Rad Mirzayan, hinted at the possibility of handing over new maps of minefields to Azerbaijan in addition to those which are already handed over, but only through international partners. Is Moscow still ready to become such a partner, and are there any relevant signs from Yerevan? You know, Moscow stays a partner to Yerevan and will contribute to putting an end to the military action, will contribute to preventing and even the further deterioration of the situation and the loss of Armenia. At the same time, we have already paid special attention to humanitarian issues of Armenia-Azerbaijani regulation and settlement. Russia has always assisted in exchange of those who had been captivated. And we will do all it takes to reach stability on the South Caucasus. Another question. How do you assess the reaction of our countries of the Il-76 in Belgorod Oblast and our foreign partners, how they showed themselves at the OSCE side when this issue was touched upon? You know, reaction is different. And by the way, I would divide it into official reaction and the reaction of ordinary people, because you see that the media only silences the reaction of the public, and the public is not informed about the key aspects of international relations and that's happening. If we talk about the collective West, the reaction is crazy, because these are just insane people who can welcome or justify or sympathize with terroristic acts. It's just people who have no sanity, no conscience, who are immoral. These are the people who can allow themselves to support those who perform terrorist acts or acts of extremism, who rejoice in their success. And we see many ignoring this information, pretending that what we didn't hear, didn't see, do not understand, or have to get more time to look into it. I will talk about this. I will give you another opportunity to check. So how can you check whether the countries or the authorities are sincere when talking about needing more time to look into some issue? If in other situations the same political leaders say that they have more time to look into this issue, then in this particular case we do have a right to say so. But if in other cases, for example, to condemn Russia for those stage incidents in Salisbury, or that they accuse Syrian authorities of using chemical weapons, or I don't know, there are many examples for that. So if they didn't need more time to check these out, and within just several hours, we presented charges or made decisions which led to the introduction of sanctions or extradition of diplomats, then this is not just double standards, not just hypocrisy, it's for your own kind of destruction, because the same people cannot treat events in the world in a different way. We can have different assessments, evaluation, but the system of analysis for assessments and conclusions cannot be different. We should have the same method. We should be objective. We should rely on facts and ask for additional information when needed. But this kind of imbalance in such a short period of time, well, I have not seen it for quite a while. When we need to, we basically charge and make decisions really fast at the speed of light. But when we do not need to, we prolong this process and we say that we need more time, and then we never get back to this issue. Just look at this. So I was talking about the situation in Salisbury, Amesbury, talking about the Skripal case, the Novichok case. Within a few hours, the Prime Minister of Britain recorded an address performed at the Parliament. The decisive measures to protect national security were taken. Diplomats had to face extradition. They held NATO meetings and tried to make other countries also make the diplomats face extradition. How did we do this? How the expertise was held? How did we inform the partners? We did not talk about this. It was made in the blink of an eye. And at the same time, it took them several hours to several days to hold an expertise of, as we say, chemical weapon. Take measures and put them into practice. And here we see what we still have the need to get more information, to get additional information. And we're not going to go back to this issue. You can say that this example is irrelevant, but do you remember the stage act of the West when it came to the landing of a western plain or territory of Belarus, which we linked to a single of a possible illegal objects on this plane? Okay, there was a security threat and the plane landed. Do you remember the craziness over it? Everyone was intact. Nothing was illegal. But we went to International Aerial Organization. We went to NATO. We exercised pressure on the West in order to impose this label, this feeling of the blame of Minsk on the audience. When was it? Remind me. I don't think it was in 2023. I don't think it was in 2024. So how much time has passed? They said that Belarus was guilty, but it took them such a long time to figure out what happened in reality. At the same time, everybody understands what happened. Do you just realize how cynical this is? When we want to accuse someone, political decisions, international steps are made rapidly. And later on, then the public, the general public, calls for evidence. They say that there are investigations, meetings, commissions, committees, additional bodies. So we just prolong the process for years, and it doesn't lead to anything. And at the same time, and we have the same thing here, and the same goes for Bucha, information bomb, and then they cited and cited and cited what happened. But what happened does not matter that much. It's of no interest to anyone. That's the Western narrative. Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Zakharova. And another question is, the U.S. gave the state of Texas 5 days to let them enter the Shelby Park at the border of Mexico. Do you think that if a grand-scale conflict with human rights violations started, do you think Russia should support Texas in this conflict? I think it's a domestic affair for the U.S. I think we just obliged to do it themselves, to solve this issue themselves, with their own methods, using their own tools. But if you're talking about human rights, bearing in mind that it was the U.S. which made this a transborder issue and national enough, so that from the point of view of Washington, it can freely override the sovereignty of states. I think that we should pay close attention to this issue. Thank you very much, Ms. Zakharova. Thank you. Is the Moscow Post here? Yes, good afternoon. Good afternoon. We have 2 questions left. Can you hear me well? Yes, yes. So, Judgement has denounced 9 agreements within the framework of CIS. The agreement on coordinating policy in the field of natural gas transit, dated November 3rd, 1995, was terminated. How will this affect Transnistria? And what's the situation with the payment of debts for Moldova for supplied gas? I don't think there is any link between the leaving this agreement and the shipments of natural gas to Transnistria. Let me remind you that in February of 2008, Russia left this agreement and as for Moldova's debt before Gazprom. We have already commented on this numerous times. There were no changes. And let me remind you that in October 2021, Gazprom and the representatives of Moldovan authorities were held on terms of which concerned natural gas shipments.
To take into account the interests of Moldova and adopted all the suggestions of Chisinau, a protocol was adopted to audit historic debt. No agreement with the Moldovan authorities hasn't been put in practice, and in September 2023, the Minister of Energy of Moldova released the so-called audit report on historic debt, based on which the Moldovan authorities claimed de facto absence of any date. This report is not in line with international standards of independent audit. It cannot be viewed as a due final document, and its conclusions cannot influence the amount of the debt which was recorded, which was both memorialized in the documents and decisions of the International Arbitrary Court. So in this regard, we would like to bring your attention that Gazprom is a reliable supplier of energy, and we call official Chisinau to take a responsive approach in fulfilling their obligations. Another question, please. It's about Mongolia. Moldova dissolved 2 agreements on military observers and collective forces, peacekeeper forces of March and August 1992. How it will impact the status of Russian peacekeepers in Transnistrian region? Thank you. These documents you mentioned, which Moldova is going to withdraw, they were signed within the CIS. As for the peacekeeping operations in Dnistria, so the legal framework is the agreement on the principles of peaceful settlement of the armed conflict in the Transnistrian region. It was signed on the 21st of July 1992 by President of Russia and Moldavia in the presence of the leader of the Transnistrian region. The Russian peacekeepers were deployed in the region on the July 29, 1992, and they live on the left bank of Dniester in accordance with Articles 2 and 4 of these documents. And along with the Moldavian and Transnistrian troops, they are comprised in the joint peacekeepers forces. The mandate of this peacekeeping operation links the Russian presence is based on political agreement on the Transnistrian conflict, and it's a long way ahead. The Russian position remains unchanged. It means that Russian peacekeepers ensure peace for more than 30 years, and they should continue their activities. And thus, for the situation with these efforts of the Russophobic regime is fraught with new escalation, reaffirms the need to continue this peacekeeping mission. Thank you. As you see, to your questions, they are connected not only by Moldavia, but it's more about the principles which underpin the Western policy. They took energy resources and they had a debt for that. At one moment, they said that they do not need to pay them back, to pay them off, because they made some new calculations. So how can we believe these documents? So one time they can say if the environment changes that they don't have any debts. And all references to the documents have no meaning, they would say. By the way, unfortunately, this become a principle for all what is about the collective West, about the current leadership of Moldavia. The Western influence is seen obviously here. Is Media Corporation China with us? Yes, Madam Zakharova, good afternoon. We have two questions. Today you've cited a lot Jens Stoltenberg, who recently said that he does not see any direct threat from Russia on one side, and on the other side, NATO started largest military drills as defendant. And if Stoltenberg says that he does not see any threat, so from whom they should defend and how Russia will respond to such drills? I've just made a comment on that. They learn how to expand and how to make an offensive, and they do not attack only when they understand that they won't be repelled. It's quite obvious. The new history suggests to us this fact, and they should somehow divert attention of the population of this failing Ukraine, failure for the West, and you need to mobilize its own economy. And they can do so by some administrative tools, because their liberal economic system has been disrupted. It's being in impasse by itself because of the Western actions, because they've dismantled all the liberal foundations of economy by sanctions, property economy, and so on and so forth. So all these elements of administrative revival of economy, they are linked with these military and political issues, and so on and so forth. So our response, I have already mentioned it. Thank you. And my second question. Recently, the China's Secretary General published a white book, the first book of China that he systematically considers this topic, which covers, and I quote, some countries use double standards in their fight against terrorism, politicizing human rights and using them as weapons to attack other countries for anti-terrorist activities. Yes, this is another quotation with terrorist manifestations. And what are the reasons for this, in your opinion? And how do you see China's counter-terrorist activities? The release of this document is very timely and is very like our key assessments. amid this degradation of international terrorist security. We are working closely with our China colleagues at various platforms. Of course, this is BRICS, United Nations, and we develop our cooperation. It will be safe to say that China is fighting terrorism without prejudice to their own interests or to the interests of other states. We cannot say about the collective West the same. First and foremost, it cannot be said about the United States and its allies. I remember the times when the United States proclaimed themselves as pioneers in the fight against terrorism. Moreover, they proclaimed themselves as kind of suppliers of anti-terrorist standards. They elaborate its international documents. They showed activities. And today, they are not hiding their support to terrorist cells all across the world. They try to use this counterterror to gain their political goals. And we know how the West, first and foremost the United States and Great Britain and the United Kingdom, sponsor these terrorist cells, calling them as moderate, as speaking that they are pushing forward their own interest in the region and so on and so forth, and trying to return this sliding dominance. They try to create a controlled chaos in the various regions, including with the use, as I've said, of these terrorist elements. This moment is obvious that Washington and its allies have failed as the global guarantor of security, and their recipes for combating terrorism increasingly reflect political cynicism and criminal irresponsibility. And this can be confirmed by the situation in Afghanistan. It's not just the situation, but this shameful flee from the Afghanistan failure in the Middle East. It's a disaster triggered by them. Support of the Kiev regime, of the neo-Nazi regime in Ukraine, which is now uses terrorist methods. They block international efforts on the international track, use double standard policy. So we have many evidence. Our China colleagues released a document which is an important message to all those forces to rally around to ensure global security and stability and forge a just and sustainable multipolar world underpinned by international law and state sovereignty as it is enshrined in the relevant decisions. Thank you very much. Is Reuters with us? Madam Zakharova, good afternoon. I have two questions. I think the first one you've already answered. Nevertheless, the Turkish parliament acknowledged the day before Viktor Orban, Prime Minister of Hungary, said that he will call for his parliament to ratify Sweden accession. So such decisions and sayings on behalf of the leaders of the states who deny or who advocate their own interests, how does the Ministry of Affairs, International Affairs, what can it say about it? You think that we ever forgot about the real scheme of this regime that is completely totalitarian? Maybe in the early 90s we had some illusions. Then we woke up from this dream, and at the very beginning we were talking about, we acknowledged some things to NATO, and then we spoke up in public that this totalitarian regime is like a kind of a grouping in NATO, and we will remember this. As for participation of Sweden in NATO, I've just already talked you through in details. Do you have any other questions? My second question. In last December, Mr. Lavrov, following his discussions with his Indian counterpart, said that Russia-India has discussed the prospects of military cooperation and agreed to produce new weapons. Can you please tell us through what precise guns you are talking about and about the contracts? The Ministry of Foreign Affairs coordinates while pursuing its foreign policy, including in the public area, and takes stock of all the work in various aspects. But the real projects is the responsibility of some separate agencies. And as for the military cooperation, these are the Ministry of Defense and all the system of the military complex. Let me remind that it was about in the year 2000 when we established the Russian-Indian Intergovernmental Commission on military and technical cooperation, headed by the Minister of Defense, with the aim objective to coordinate such cooperation between India and Russia. So all the details, all the dates, the volumes, contracts, and so on and so forth, that's the question to be addressed to these agencies. We can provide you the contact details. Thank you, Madam Zakharova. Is Radio Saga with us? Radio Saga is Iceland. Good afternoon. What are relations with Russia with the African continent, in particular with Western Africa, after the government was changed in some countries? For example, the Central African Republic, Chad, Mali, Burkina Faso, and others. Can you please make a comment in more details at this great press conference of Lavrov when he said about some kind of suggestion of some non-English speaking countries in this region? Once again, please, the last part. Mr. Lavrov said at his press conference about some kind of country which is a non-English speaking country, suggested some deal for their common interests in this region where the new governments came in the region. Can you please talk us through? So let us start from Africa. Following the second summit Russia-Africa, we've adopted a detailed joint declaration, and it indicates how we will develop our relations. You've referred to some countries: Niger, Chad, Burkina Faso, and I'm ready to provide you some reference materials on our cooperation in various fields, and I would do so. As for statements, I can say basically that, by the way, we were very quick to respond to the request of Burkina Faso and Niger to support in their combat against terrorism. We send them grain, oil products. We train their staff on preferential terms. We see their gratitude, which proves that we've made an effective assistance and provides prospects for our good partnership. And I will provide you more detailed information additionally. I believe, unfortunately, I didn't catch up your question because I have nothing to add to what Minister Lavrov said. Maybe you can please tell me in detail your question, then I can clarify what you're talking about. Maybe you can send me later when you formulate it, because right now I can just cite Mr. Lavrov, if you have any details, of course I would do so with pleasure. Okay, thank you. Let's move on. Is Great Asia Channel with us? Good afternoon, Madam Zakharova. The recent UN conference of Lavrov saw the large queue of all those who wanted to talk to Sergei Lavrov. So amid this background, how do you see the negotiations and what is the overall significance of the Asian agenda in the foreign policy? I think we should avoid such words as the queue and so on and so forth, because we don't have a sense that some kind of lack of equality. We have joint desire to develop relationships, although those we can do so on the basis of mutual respect and mutual benefit, on the basis of our bilateral agreements. I'm aware of what you're talking about, and I think you mean that amid these statements about Russia's isolation, we see obvious interest to Russia from various continents, and I can agree with that. And I think we cannot use the word a queue. Of course, we had some requests for meetings. We organized them. It was within the traditional rules of diplomacy. We discussed the unilateral, multilateral, and bilateral issues. In some cases, we agreed on some dates. Somewhere we made some conclusions. Each meeting is very valuable to us. If you want me to say some specifics, so please say which country do you want to hear about. I think that we've released everything in the mass media. Everything is clear, thank you. Is Russian vector of strategic purpose with us? Good afternoon, Madam Zakharova. Let me readjust Ruski vector. We have 4 questions. The first one, Ambassador of China in France, by answering to the question of the reporter, said that the republics of the former USSR do not have legitimate status in accordance with international law. So that is why there is no international agreement in accordance with which they can enjoy their legitimate status. Do you agree with these statements of the China's ambassador? I take the view that we are acting on the basis of our national legislation, which regulates our relations both with the former republics as relations between sovereign states and regulates our status as a successor of the Soviet Union and the sovereign state. And I respect all viewpoints of political scientists, experts. We'll come back to that period.
All those who look into the documents and try to find some kind of contradictions or responses, they can do it for as much as they want. But we do have those norms who regulate the functioning of the MFA and the agencies. Thank you. My second question. Yes. What is guided by the Russian Foreign Ministry in its activities? Is it international norms or rules or laws of the Russian Federation? I don't think there is any contradiction here, and there cannot be no contradiction, as we have a document which is the concept of our foreign policy and other documents, which are quite clear in accordance with paragraph 4 of section 1 of the regulations of Ministry of Foreign Affairs, which was approved by presidential decree of July 11th, 2004. number 865. So, direct quote, Minister of Foreign Affairs of Russian Federation and its activities is guided by the Constitution of the Russian Federation, federal constitutional laws, federal laws, acts of the President and the government of the Russian Federation, international treaties, as well as this position. And according to the Constitution of the Russian Federation, generally recognized principles and norms of international law or international treaties make part of the legal system of our countries. We are guided by the Constitution. Thank you. And third question is, the United Nations stands on three pillars: inviolability of borders, the right of nations to self-determination, the sovereignty of states. So will the world be multipolar, or will we continue to live with one center of power, with one decision-making center in Washington, D.C., since the world today is unipolar? Yes, the world be multipolar. It already is multipolar, and it's just taken shape as reality, as new realities which are demanded, which demand new political platform, economic platform, and new ties. Yes, this is my answer. It's quite straightforward. And the last question is, in Moscow, in the residence of the Canadian ambassador, a meeting with Jan Rachinsky was held. Jan Rachinsky was warmly welcomed by a mass rally of a national liberation movement. So, in this regard, why such citizens move freely around the country? Because let me remind you with this. This is a foreign agency memorial according to the decree of the President of Russian Federation. So is the Minister of Foreign Affairs planning to impose any restrictions on such people? I think you touched upon an issue which has to do with our domestic legislation, and you have to refer yourself to the law enforcement agencies if you see what Russian laws are not being abided by on the territory of Russian Federation. You have to address law enforcement agencies here. Thank you. That's it. I will look into this once again. I think that it can have to do with our sphere, but I'm not sure. Is Anadolu here? Yes. Good afternoon, Maria Vladimirovna. Our question is the following. International Court of the United Nations made an interim decision on a case launched by South Africa against Israel on preventing genocide. Can you comment on this issue, please? Yes, I will do so when I consult our lawyers who are already working on this now. Thank you very much. And another question is, please tell me, the U.S. coalition in the Red Sea, do you think it's an attempt to refer attention from the actions of the U.S. in Gaza? I don't think that they are trying to distract us. I think it's an additional act of putting the policy of chaos into practice. They try to destabilize the situation in the region because that's the way they usually do. After that, they will try to do what they think serves their interest at the moment. Unfortunately, that's their traditional scam. That's good. And the last question has to do with recent terrorist attack in Iran. The responsibility for that was taken by official representative of Gil Hassan from Tajikistan. And does Russia think that Gil Hassan is domesticated in Tajikistan and this was a threat to Moscow? How these representatives come to Central Asia, including Afghanistan? And as we know, the Afghan ISIS branch, Vilayat Khorasan, has claimed responsibility for this act, but I do not know how it's linked with Tajikistan. But for the fact that one of the suicide bombers, according to what we see in Iran, originated from Tajikistan. But I will say once again, that's what Iranian sources claim. And as for ISIS Vilayat Khorasan, it's an Afghan branch of ISIS terroristic group, which counts from 4,000 to 6,000 people, if we include the members of the families of those terrorists at the territory of Afghanistan. And they pose a threat not only to Afghanistan, but to the region on the whole. The situation in Afghanistan and the Tajik-Afghani border is what we're closely following, and we are in close contact with Dushanbe, on terms of diplomatic relations as well as on the regional side, such as Moscow format, Shanghai Organization of Cooperation, and so on and so forth. Another turn, Russian Federation is trying to provide substantial aid to the defense capabilities of our friendly state, and we think that it's important to the stability of Central Asia. What's important is the 201st Russian military base, which is deployed in Tajikistan. And it's on a regular basis that we pay attention to the necessity of preventing threat of spread of terroristic and extremist elements, especially coming from Afghani territory into neighbor states and Central Asia in particular. The terrorists from the Middle East can also get into this region through the aid of third countries, which I have already spoken about before. Thank you. Thank you. Is Kurdistan 24 here? Yes, can you hear me? Yes, dear Ms. Zakharova, good afternoon. Good afternoon. It's Kurdistan 24 here. On the night of 15th January, Iran has issued several ballistic missiles and launched them against civilian settlements in Erbil. As a result, 4 civilians were killed and 6 people were wounded. What is the position of the Russian Federation when it comes to Iranian attacks on Iraqi Kurdistan? I have already commented on that during the briefing on the January the 17th, but I can only say once again that we are sure that it's of utter importance to continue our fight against terrorist groups no matter where they are situated, and we think that any kind of counter-terrorist operations in the territory of other states is only admissible if you coordinate your actions with the authorities of the states, and we are talking about our friendly states of Syria and Iraq. Such approach can also help minimize victims against the civilians, among the civilians, and minimize humanitarian risks. Thank you. Is Liverok here? Yes, good afternoon, Maria Vladimirovna. I have 2 questions today. The President of Azerbaijan has said that the anniversary of Midza Day is to be celebrated. But he was a Nazi cooperator and took part in the Azerbaijani Legion of Wehrmacht, which fought against the USSR back in the day. How can you comment on this? You know, we have already spoken to Azerbaijan about this, and we keep in contact with them. Thank you. Thank you. And the second question is, during our conference on the January 23rd, the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Armenia, Rad Mirzayan, called on his Russian counterparts, how to put that? They said that the seizure of Nagorno-Karabakh by Azerbaijan is their own fault, and we called on us to follow the logic and the chronology and not to blame the Armenian side of the things they are not guilty of. It has to do with the Russian refusal to take part in the Azerbaijani plan, and they said that Armenia did not get help from Russia, even though they asked for it. In term, you know, the tone and the body of the press conference of Mr. Mirzayan are deploring, and instead of making conclusions from your own mistakes and miscalculations, we tried to put the blame on Russia again, which cannot be justified because these are not our mistakes. Unfortunately, I must admit that these are the mistakes of Yerevan. And this has to do with our relations with Russia, as well as it is applicable to our Armenia-Azerbaijani settlement. I don't think what we should go into detail about this, because basically every part of this contains some distortion of the truth. However, apart from the briefing, I think we can provide you additional material on that. So what's wrong is the claims made by Armenian diplomacy when it comes to Russian allegedly postponing the settlement of the issue of Nagorno-Karabakh. I know what the Minsk group of OSCE tackled this issue with this very wording, and the so-called gentleman agreement was reflected during the contacts of leaders of Azerbaijan and Armenia in November 2022. As a result, a tripartite agreement on the highest level was made and adopted. It doesn't have to do with, has nothing to do with the reality when we talk about the interpretation of the Mirziyonovi actions when it comes to Yerevan referring to Russia asking for help. The Armenian authority asked us to help them settle the situation in accordance with the bilateral agreements at hand. Russian-Armenian consultations at different levels were held, including those at the level of the Minister of Foreign Affairs and the Minister of Defense. And, an extraordinary meeting of the Council of Collective Security was convened. As a result, a proposal to send a special mission to Armenia was made, and if the Armenian authorities had not abused their powers, we would such a mission would be functioning already. But Yerevan decided to do a different thing. They thought that it was better to send European Union's observers, who in fact were just gathering investigative information about Russia and Iran. And it's no secret that at the summit of leaders of Armenia, Azerbaijan, and Brussels, under the auspices of Charles Michel, was held on August 31st of 2022. And if we follow the logic of Mr. Mirzayan about the cause and consequences, this Brussels meetings could not address the differences between the sides and led to the escalation which followed. We also see that there are differences between those words of this tripartite agreement not working, but at the same time, the same statement, according to which Armenia carried out its obligations under the agreements. And I think that was kind of funny language. And I don't know if Western partners will like that. I don't know. Maybe we could come up with some kind of different words and new formula. It does not correspond to the facts. I don't know why we see that against attempts to sabotage the works of a tripartite commission. And I must admit that we have already proposed that Mr. Mirzayan comes to Moscow for consultations, and that was also discussed on different levels. It was just several days ago that we contacted them for the last time. Thank you. Thank you. Is the voice of the Parliament here? Yes, good afternoon, Maria Vladimirovna. Yes, good afternoon. So the question is, what is the sovereignty of Ukraine is based upon? If, according to law of 1409 and the withdrawal of a Union Republic's Perimeter South from 1919, Ukraine did not comply with the legal procedure. At the time of 1991, this law was in force, but we have not been able to find any document which would cancel the operation of this law, you know? Yes. So why is Russia not following the path of challenging Ukraine's sovereignty, for example, in court? Well, you know, I don't think that this issue should be addressed to me. I think what these are lawyers who should look into this question. As for us, we're responsible for foreign policy adopted by highest levels. And you know what, we act as a successor in terms of this issue as well for quite a long time. But I think that I could address it to our lawyers and experts. Do you think you could initiate some kind of discussion? I don't think that it has to do with the Minister of Foreign Affairs. I have heard the President say several times that the sovereignty of Ukraine is based on the Declaration of Independence, but why do not initiate the procedure of a united fatherland, which would be based on international law, and as a result for the Second World War, because international law should play a primal role. It should override declarations of independence. I do think that we can debate over that, but I can say once again what I have already said. The Article 1 of the law against the relations between USSR and RSFSR. Well, the two republics have said that both of them were sovereign states. This is a direct quote. In the Accord of 1919 was replaced with what one of 1997, and as for Law 1409 was denounced by Ukraine. But I'll say once again, what is with pleasure, what we will provide more material on Ukraine not abiding by this agreement on friendship. Thank you. And another question: why can we not change our military doctrine and try to head our rockets against the cities of U.S. because it was back when the United States did not try to start a war anywhere. I don't think what is what the Minister of Defense does, but as Minister of Foreign Affairs, it would be more effective for you. It would be more effective if you took part in negotiations internationally, if the U.S. feared your actions, because that's what the USSR did, and it was far more effective. Well, the fact that the United States did not start any wars back when, I think this is a mistake, because during Cold War they started so many wars, so many coups d'etats, so many conflicts under the flags of different countries. Those things are numerous. I'm talking about Korean Peninsula. I'm talking about Vietnam. I think you know this full well.
As for with what it would be convenient for us to work with, you can prolong this list. Can you please allow me another question? The territory of the Soviet Union, they supplied weapons. We did not have any war. Oh, just a second. Please, it is my piece of advice, at least to start with a film of common fascism and Nazism. Immediately after the war, when everything was defined, we were allied, but nevertheless, we separated the world into the zone of influence, and the Soviet Union was a victorious state in this war. And immediately after the end of the Great Patriotic and the Second World War, immediately after establishment of the United Nations with its charter, with its principles, sovereignty, non-interference, respect, and so on and so forth, after the Nuremberg Tribunal, which enshrined and judged and punished a subversive redeployment of all the changes which should have been put in place through the United States and NATO agencies to commit illegal actions and acts on the territory of the Soviet Union. And that is only one example. Please have read of memoirs of the Western politicians. Hillary Clinton was clearly wrote about these sabotage activities. That's about the thing that they did not do something this. If you don't have any questions, please let me conclude. If you don't have any questions, so please see you later. Bye. Goodbye.